Welcome to the Dad Show podcast. How y'all doing?
Welcome to the Dad Show podcast, a show all about impacting, empowering, inspiring, and uplifting information to become a better dad, husband, man, and mentor. And now your host, Ryan Ladd.
Welcome back to the Dad Show, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank y'all for being with us and being here. Today I got Mr. Jon Fogel. He's in a remote podcast with us today. He's not in studio, but Jon is the author of a book that's going to be out when this podcast airs. It's The Punishment-Free Parenting. And Jon is also the host of the WholeParent podcast. He's a social media influencer. And as if that isn't enough, he's a dad of 4 and a husband as well. So, Jon, I just want to thank you for being on the Dad Show and being with us today, man.
Ryan, it's my pleasure to be here. I love having conversations with other dads, and so, this is a treat for me.
Oh, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a treat for everybody else, and I'm going to learn a lot too. Jon's got some great tips on how to parent and be a better father, and just, man, I'm so excited about today. I really am. So, Jon, if you don't mind, before we get into everything I just said about you today, let's give people just a little bit of background, and then I want to kind of go into a little bit of childhood kind of stuff, and then we'll come up to present day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I should start by saying that the first words in the book are, I was not always a punishment-free parent. And I know that just hearing that title, people want to kind of switch off and be like, oh, this isn't going to be worth my time. And so I would just encourage people, like, I am a pretty reasonable, normal person, and I have pretty reasonable, normal takes. I am not an extremist in any way, but I have learned a lot about parenting along the way, not just from my own experience, but it's all framed around my own experience. So it started out as I was raised in a family, a Christian family, great parents, to be honest. There's very little that I can criticize about my parents, because when I look at what they came from versus how they raised me, there was a lot of generational baggage that they stripped off to do as good of a job raising me as they did. That said, I was raised in the 90s, and with that comes the fact that we just didn't know what we know now about the brain and about learning and about development. And a lot of people want to go back and they want to say, oh, well, things were easier back then, or things were simpler back then. That may be the case, but today, with the birth of the internet and with social media and with everything else, parenting is no longer as easy as it maybe once was. The things that we might have been able to get away with, and I'm not going to say any of us, there was consequences to all of that, but a lot of those consequences were far less severe than doing that same stuff today. And so when I had kids of my own, it was kind of 3 things happening all at once. First thing is that I had a kid earlier than anybody else in my social circle. So I got married to my high school sweetheart right out of college. We had a kid within 2 years of getting married, wow, which is a pretty standard, 1970s approach to child rearing and getting married and stuff. But this all happened, in the 2000s. And so very few of my friends, actually none of my friends, even to this day from high school, are married with kids. And so when we had our first son 8 years ago, there was nobody in my life who I could look to other than how I was raised, where I could say, this is how I should be raising my kid. And so I defaulted to that. Just, hey, we just do what was done to us.
Yeah.
And then at the same time that was happening, I was also in seminary to become a pastor, and I was also in foster care training, because we were going to foster to adopt. That was kind of our, what would have been laid on our heart, what we were kind of our mission going forward. And so simultaneously, we got this 1-year-old, maybe almost 2-year-old. Here I am in seminary. I had lost my dad at this time as well. He had passed away. And so I'm thinking about what it is to be a parent, what it is to be a dad. Now I'm a dad who doesn't have a dad anymore. And I had this really pivotal experience where I was learning all of this stuff about development and recognizing abuse and trauma in kids that's necessary to become a counselor, which is part of being a pastor, working in chaplaincy environments and things like that. And I'm watching all of these foster care training videos, which was how we were trained. And this woman who was the foster care trainer, she didn't have any educational background in development or psychology or anything like that, but she had just fostered like 25 kids, and that's how she had found this role with the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
And she said, after fostering these kids who came from kind of the most difficult behavioral baggage backgrounds. I mean, these kids were stealing stuff, tearing stuff up, cussing at their parents, like all of the things, right? Getting in fights, getting expelled. What she said was, really punishment doesn't work to teach anybody. And the only reason that punishment seems like it works is because there is a relationship of love and support in most families that can supersede the punishment.
Yeah.
But the punishment isn't what's teaching the lesson. The punishment actually is totally ineffective. But the relationship and the connection is teaching. And the punishment is just getting in the way. And with these kids who come from backgrounds where they don't have that connection, that relationship, the only way to teach them is through relationship and punishment, or relationship and communication and love. And if you punish them, they'll actually just do the opposite. They'll just do all of the stuff that you are trying to punish them to get them to stop doing those things. They'll actually do those things more.
Wow.
And
I never thought of it that way, man.
It changed my life.
Yeah.
It changed my life. So here I am. I'm in seminary. I got this kid. I'm supposed, now I'm a licensed foster parent. And I just became consumed. And I have ADHD, so this is part of it. I hyperfixate.
Yeah.
And I became consumed with this idea that there must be a better way to parent, and that I had been lied to. And I'll come right out and say, part of the reason why I went to seminary in the first place is because I read the Bible for myself. And in that process, I realized that a lot of things that I thought were in there weren't in there, and a lot of things that I didn't never know about were there and prevalent. And so this was a very parallel experience of feeling like, boy, I really thought I knew how to parent. I'm very happy with the person that I've become. But I thought I knew how to parent, and in reality, a lot of the things that I thought I knew, it was the opposite.
Wow.
And so I consumed, I devoured like 25 parenting books in the span of, a month or two. And then I was not done with that. I was in an academic field, and so I had access to academic university libraries where I could go and just devour research papers and all this stuff. And I found out, oh, you know what? My sister-in-law's a neuroscientist. Didn't even really know what she did at work. Okay, now I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
And through that process, I basically came up with what was very clearly laid out in all of these books written by psychologists and developmental psychologists, stuff like that. And what was crazy to me was that what they were telling me on how I should parent was basically the opposite of what I assumed. And yet all of them agreed. Faith-based, non-faith-based, all of it.
That's what I was about to ask. So all this information that you consumed, was a lot of it conflicting, or it was just...
None of it was conflicting.
Wow.
And that was the only thing it conflicted with, was what I assumed I knew. And this basically propelled me to become a person who just, anytime I saw somebody struggling in my life with kids, now at this point I'd become a pastor, some time is passing as these things happen.
Yeah.
I'm watching children in my church struggle with things, and I'm counseling and I'm offering these solutions, and people are like, this stuff works, man. Like, this is crazy. And over time, I began to see changes in my own life with my own kids. And people just saying, like, I don't understand how your kids are so easy. And to me, I'm going, my kids aren't easy. That's crazy talk. But when you parent effectively, you don't have to repeat yourself. And you don't have to, fight over everything. You don't have to power struggle. You don't have to do this stuff that nobody wants to do in the first place. And so over time, I was just like, oh my gosh, this works so well. Then, I came across a little platform called TikTok. People might have heard of it before. It's in the news.
A little bit these days.
Little bit. We talk about it a little bit. And it was at that moment on TikTok when it was starting to become a platform for not just, a bunch of teenagers doing silly dances, but adults trying to share information. and I started sharing what I had learned, but just in a practical, actionable way, not in a real fancy, like, but I think people are smart. And I think, that's a weird take for people, but I think most people, if you explain things to them in a reasonable terms, they're going to get it. And man, almost overnight, within a couple months, I had a couple 100,000 followers. People just saying, I did this. And not just like I saw this video and I followed you. Like, I saw a video, I thought, I wonder if that works. Then they went and tried it, and then they found me. They came back and found me because they were like, holy smokes, does this stuff work? And so it's nothing revolutionary.
Yeah.
It's just what people have known, what smarter people than me have learned from studies, from psychology, from neuroscans. We've known this stuff, but we have not yet gotten people to actually adopt this stuff. And so that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I became a whole parent, and that's why I started the podcast. That's why I did all of it, because I want to be a person who shares this information, so it's not news to people.
Yeah,
that you don't have to punish your kid, that actually it's getting in the way.
Well, that's, it goes against everything, just like you, the way that I was taught, the way that I was brought up. If I didn't clean my room when my dad told me to clean my room, he raised his voice, or I got a spanking, or, all the above. And so I find myself, even with my kid's condition, and I unfortunately, well, I'll probably give my daughter more grace because she's a big daddy's girl than I do my son. But even in this day and age, and I still get aggravated. I still raise my voice, and then obviously threaten with, if you don't do that, I'm gonna give you a spanking, or you're gonna be put in time out, or I'm taking whatever, some kind of punishment that way. So that's really powerful to hear that all this information and books, and from all these very, very smart people that are a lot smarter than I am, says the same thing, and it's not conflicting to the way that we were raised.
Well, and we also have to do some defining here, right? When I say punishment, I'm not saying that you don't ever hold your kids accountable. I'm not saying that you don't, that there is never a place for your kid to experience the consequences of their actions, or that you can't even impose certain consequences effectively that are non-punitive. What we're talking about with punishment is, in the most basic understanding of the word, is that we sometimes get into this mindset, and it works a little bit with adults, but actually what we're now learning is it doesn't even really work with adults. That if you cause a person some form of pain, and I'm not just saying physical pain like a spanking, but when you yell at a child, you're invoking fear, which is its own sort of social pain. You're invoking disconnection, right? Whenever you cause a person pain, their brain goes into a state, into a pattern of not learning anything. It's trying to survive. And the lie that we've told ourselves is that if you put a person into survival mode, that's so uncomfortable that they'll do anything that they can to not get in that place again. Where we've fallen short is realizing that just because they do things to avoid that does not mean that they've learned the lesson that we want them to learn.
Yeah.
It just means that they've learned a lesson. And so when people say, well, yeah, but I was spanked for doing, for talking back to my mom, and I never did that again. The many people say, well, so it worked. What you're saying is it worked. I would say, why didn't you talk back to your mother again? Did you not talk back because you knew that it hurt her feelings and that you're trying to be kind? Or did you not talk back because you were afraid? Did you not talk back because you arbitrarily learned that if you were going to say that stuff about your mom, you had to say it behind her back?
Not let anybody hear, yeah.
And not let anybody hear. And what we're actually conditioning children to do is not to stop any problematic behavior. We're conditioning them to hide their problematic behavior. And in the age of the internet, that is one of the most dangerous things that you can do. You have to be the person that your kid brings things to, because if you're not, you lose all semblance of leadership in your family.
So let's kind of put it into perspective. Let's say that, you do find your child talking back to your wife.
Yep.
And let's roll out that scenario so that we can kind of paint a picture of how you would handle that situation, rather than, you know, a spanking or, you know,
Right.
let's just hear it.
Any punishment, right?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, before we get into the practical, so I have this like 5-step thing in the book that goes through exactly what I would do in any scenario like this. And this is a perfect example, Ryan. So I'm glad that we're covering this one.
Okay.
But step 1, I call it whole because I'm WholeParent, WHOLE. So W is the wiring, understanding what's going on in your brain and their brain. And before we talk about how we can actually understand the wiring, what's going on with them in those moments, or your wife, you also have to appreciate that none of us parent from a blank slate. So Ryan, you could say, I never want to punish I read this book or I talked to this guy and I never want to punish my kids again. You're not starting from a blank slate. Just like when you start a journey to become work out or whatever, or quit any sort of, habit forming activity, you don't start from zero. And so the first step is always to ask yourself in those moments, and this is very uncomfortable for most men to ask themselves, where is this reaction coming from? And so when I walk up and see my kid talking back to my wife, is my reaction coming from, I am hurt that somebody would speak to my wife that way? Or is my reaction coming from, when I was growing up, if I ever did that, I was caused some serious discomfort or pain. And now when I see a child do that, the neural pathways in my brain fire. And I actually, and most people don't want to hear this, I get so anxious and nervous and scared, is the truth, that I will do anything to stop that behavior in that moment. And so when I see people who default to, what I call command demand parenting, just command demand, right? You stop that right now or else.
Yeah.
When I see people default to that, what I see is a person who's very scared of that emotional interaction. And we have to appreciate, because Ryan, I yell at my kids too sometimes. Like, I am not perfect in any way, shape, or form. I get to that point. I was never hit as a child, to be honest. And so that is never my default reaction. But I understand that people who were, that could have the same, feeling of, you kind of go into that automatic mode. So here's what the first thing you have to ask is, where is this actually coming from? Consider your own wiring. So the first thing I do when I walk into that situation is actually, I realize that any good parenting, if my child is talking back to my wife, one of two things is happening. One, they're so upset that they're saying things that they don't mean. Or two, they just have no clue what they're saying.
Yeah.
And if it's the second one, why are we treating them like they know what they're saying? I mean, it's like when that, your 3-year-old walks up and drops that pearl on you, drops that F-bomb on you. You don't know what's coming. Like, they don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
It's to respond to that the same way that you would a 15-year-old saying F you and slamming a door in your face. Come on. Let's be. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
I was just going to say, in that perspective, though, my mind goes to, I want them to know that they don't need to say those words, even though they know they're not saying what they are.
Absolutely.
But
And so,
teach them it's wrong.
No. And that's great teaching, right? Your goal is to teach them that saying these things is inappropriate in social scenario. And this is where I run afoul of a lot of the quote parenting experts on the internet who say that you should never say anything negative to your child or whatever, or that you should never tell them when they're doing something that's inappropriate. Your child, you are their first, you don't have to be their first bully to be their first teacher.
Yeah.
If my child comes up to me and says, Dad, what is mean? I don't have to get triggered, but I can say, well, that's something that you're probably not going to want to say around grandma.
Yeah.
You feel me? So number one, if figure out where it's coming from them. Once you've checked in with yourself and you're like, I'm calm, I can do this. If you're not calm, just walk away. And I'll tell you why that's in a second here, why that's okay to walk away. It's actually better to walk away. But if you're not calm, just walk away. But if you're calm and you check in and it's the second one, they have no clue what they're saying.
Yeah.
Then at this moment, we get curious. This is my second chapter of the book. It's called Get Curious, Not Furious. You get curious. You go, well, where'd you hear that? What do you think that means? And what's crazy is that the kids will tell you the funniest things. They'll be like, oh, that's when, this happens, or that's what Dad says when blah, blah. And they will have no real conception of what they're saying. And that's a moment when you can teach. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And all of us had those people in our lives who sat us down and they taught us without having to make us feel bad about ourselves to do so.
Yeah.
So that's that second one. But if it's the first one, they are triggered and they are yelling and they are just saying the meanest things that pop into their head. In that moment, we want to grab control back. Here's the truth. No child can learn anything when they're like that. In the same way that no adult can. You see those people on road raging or whatever, you're not talking them down.
Yeah.
No adult can learn anything when they're in that brain state. No child can learn anything in that brain state. So here's the real thing. When you walk into those scenarios, and I know we're like hyperfixating on the first 3 seconds here. We're not even getting into what we say yet. But this is where most parents get stuck. What we think is, so in the whole framework, WHOLE, the first time you speak to your child is oh. Really. The first time you address the problem behavior is oh. That's more than half the way through the framework.
Yeah.
It's actually in what we do before we parent that makes all the difference. Because if we set it up, it's like painting a room. If you go and try and paint a room and you just grab a bucket of paint and a brush and you just start slapping paint, it's going to take you forever and it's going to look terrible.
Yeah.
If you prep everything, you wash down the walls, you put the tape up if you need it, you get all your supplies, you put the drop cloth down. In the end, the product's going to look better and it's actually going to probably take about the same amount of time.
Yeah.
But you did all the work on the prep.
Exactly.
Abraham Lincoln has a quote about this. I don't remember what it is, but you can find it and put it into the episode.
I definitely will.
It's a chopping. If you tell me to chop down, this is what it is. If you tell me to chop down a tree in 3 hours, I'll spend the first 2 hours sharpening the axe.
Yeah.
Right? Because he wants to work smarter, not harder. So
Exactly.
This is all parenting. You just work smarter. So you get your own brain in line. You realize my kid's not in a place where they can hear this. Then you start to unpack with them where this came from. What are you feeling right now? I don't care what they're feeling. They can't talk to their mom like that. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But let's figure out what they're feeling first, because it's like a fire alarm. Until you figure out what's causing the fire alarm to go off, it's just going to be blaring in your ears.
Yeah, exactly.
So you figure that out. That's at that point, then you can start outlining those boundaries. And we can't speak to people like that. This is how your mom's going to feel. You keep talking to her like that. This is how your wife's going to feel someday. You keep talking to her like that. And that's where we're going to go down this road. Then at that point, then we can start leading and empowering. Hey, let's try that conversation again. Let's have a do-over. Or, hey, let me be you. You tell me how this sounds to you if I just storm in the room and start yelling like this.
Yeah.
Do you even know what I'm talking about? All of that empowerment, strong step, like that stuff can happen. But until we set the groundwork for good discipline, and that's what this is. This whole book is about discipline. Until we set the groundwork for good discipline, we're just going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. Because all that punishment stuff, you say that again and I'm going to... You just sent your kid even deeper into that brain state. They couldn't hear you before. They can't even hear you an hour from now.
Wow.
And that's the place where many of us grew up in supportive enough households where we could overcome those moments of disconnection. But today, with the world that we live in, you drive that wedge between you and your kid. They don't have to come to you anymore. They'll just go find that outlet somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Which is probably a huge issue with our world today.
Absolutely. The difference is, and I think this is a big piece too, many of us when we were growing up had many secure attachment relationships with other adults outside of our parents. And so if our parents were really kind of, I don't want to say acting foolish, but if they were dysregulated, they're stressed out about work, they're stressed out about money or whatever, and then they were taking it out on us, you could go to grandma, you could go to that neighbor down the street, you go to your friend's mom, you go to that religious leader, you go to that coach, you can say, yeah, my dad's just, whatever. And that person would be logical. They were an outside perspective to say, sometimes grownups are just like that. I can help you process that, whatever. Kids don't have that
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly.
And so I hate to put this pressure on parents who are listening, but if you want to have real impact, you got to get your stuff in, like you have to get your own self under control.
Yeah.
You cannot lead somebody when you can't even lead yourself.
That's so powerful of a statement right there. Wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah. I hope so. That's what I'm trying to live by, man.
Yeah.
I don't
That's
do
good
it every
stuff,
day.
man. That's really, really good. And, like I noticed that whenever my daughter, she's my baby girl. So I can look at her and she knows
Mm-hmm.
that my son, he wants to test me every single minute of every day.
Yep.
And I've noticed that when I lose my cool, he won't listen. It completely, just goes the opposite way, just like you stated. But whenever, I'm calm and explain to him, and, there's still consequences, but, I'm not screaming. I'm kind of talking, exactly what you said about this is how it makes your mother feel. This is how it makes your friends feel. Like, and I do that same scenario that you noted there was, put yourself in this position. Like, let me act the way that you just did. And you tell me, I'm not going to say a word. You tell me what you think.
Right.
And like you said, just staying calm and doing that, it's received and they act so much better. But man, there's times whenever you still just lose your cool. And
Absolutely. Well, and here's the thing, right? Here's the good news and the hard news. It's all wrapped up in one. It's a blessing and it's a curse. If you are the type of parent who loses your cool ever, that is a very stimulating interaction with your child. So that invokes big feelings for them. And what will happen is, and this is like where I think parents get into this really bad position. What will happen is your child will stop listening to you when you don't scream because they're just waiting for you to scream, because it didn't matter until you screamed.
yeah,
Right? If eventually the only way that they get your attention or the only way that discipline is ever handed down is when you yell, they will actually, we've brain scan studies. So people put kids in fMRIs and they talk to them. They can see this happen. They will tune out your voice, your talking voice, the same way that you or I can tune out an air conditioner that's running in the background.
wow,
They'll tune you out because they're waiting to be yelled at.
yeah,
And it's not because they want to be yelled at. It's because when we get into that habitual relationship with them, it just becomes something that they are conditioned to wait for.
yeah,
And so they'll actually, this is kind of the paradox that we're kind of what you're saying, like your son doesn't like when you yell at him and it doesn't seem to work, but yet he almost goads you into it because kids are like, I will, if this bad thing is going to happen to me anyway, I want to have some say over when it happens. And here's I don't know how dark you want to go here, but what we've experienced with kids who have what's called ACE scores, which is adverse childhood experiences. These are kids like kids from the foster system, like kids who were raised with abusive parents. This goes beyond just, oh, my parent punished me, right? Like let's put these things on different landscapes. But what you see with especially girls who are abused in a way that is sexual in nature,
yeah,
that sometimes what psychologists and psychiatrists have noted is that these girls will start to seemingly invite this abuse because it's so disorienting to them that the only way to have control over it is to seemingly invite it. Now, of course, they don't want it. It's antithetical. It's traumatizing and horrible and awful and causes them immense emotional, physical distress. But having control over it feels like some semblance of this. And so when you have kids, there are kids who seem like they're just asking for punishment. Like they are just pushing you to punish them. These are the kids who are actually most affected negatively by punishment. They're the kids who are most hurt by it. They're the kids who are most hurt by the disconnection. And they're seeking out that punishment to have it on their terms because they so desperately hate it that they're like, if it's going to happen anyway, it's going to be on my terms. And that's when people say like, well, you have an easy kid, or gentle parenting works for gentle kids. And by the way, I don't call myself a gentle parent, but people will say things like that. Or, oh, like if you had my kid, some kids are just strong willed. And if you had my kid, you would know some kids just ask for it. You show me a kid who asks for it, I'll show you a highly sensitive kid who desperately needs to be the one that's never, ever punished, because they are the ones who are most deeply affected.
And like you said, it's going back to an underlying condition. It's not them acting out at that. You need to go and give it a name. You're
right.
the reason and for it, and identify it, and then come
Right.
back and build your new foundation from it. Because like you said, it's always something that's causing that.
And what's the need that's being expressed? I mean, you have experienced this more than probably most parents, of understanding that, hey, if certain things are not met with my kids, they feel a lot more discomfort. They struggle with this or that. They have, physical pain in their body if we're, not careful about whatever.
Yeah.
When they're experiencing that, you don't place the same accountability burden if they're lashing out while they're in pain. If they're lashing out while they are having these emotional, they're having a bad day, or they had a bad meeting or whatever, like, you don't when they got some bad news, you don't place the same burden. In the same way that when you have a coworker who just got divorced and they are a little snippy with you, you probably give them a little bit more grace.
Yeah.
What we fail to realize as parents is that most behaviors, problematic behaviors that we don't like, are just expressing unmet needs. They're really just saying, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm hurt, I feel lonely right now, I had a bad day at school, whatever. That's what they're really trying to communicate. And they're just doing a really poor job of communicating that. Teaching them how to communicate that is so much better than just trying to punish them out of communicating in that way.
Yeah. I had a guest on here a couple weeks ago. His name was Nathan Ray, and he talked about that same exact thing. Like, when your kids come home from school, don't just say, how was your day? Open-ended questions to them, to where they have to speak out and tell you their feelings and let you know, and open those lines of communication so that if they're a little bit aggravated, they're a little bit out of control, it's because of this, and this. It's not just because, it's Tuesday at 3:30 and I'm going to give my dad, living
hard
crap
time
all day. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. What I say in the book is, if you want a quote to pull out, what I say is, we have to realize that when our kid is giving us a hard time, they're not trying to give us a hard time. They're showing us that they're having a hard time.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that's your kid they're not giving you a hard time. They're having one.
That's a bold statement, man. That's pretty good. That's really good.
Because think of it from this perspective. You are your child's source of security. This is, by the way, why most parents will get upset when their kids are disrespectful. Look, I put a roof over your head. I put food in your belly. I make sure that you get to school on time. I keep warm clothes on your back. Your child knows all of those things.
Yeah.
If you had a person in your life, you kind of do, right? Some of us have bosses, right? But if you had a person in your life who is dependent on keeping you housed and fed and warm, there is no world where you are intentionally making that person upset.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you're so safe with that person that you're willing to be your honest self around them. And sometimes that makes them upset. But your child has a vested interest in trying to make you like them. It's why babies smile at us when they're first born, so that we'll like them and not leave them by the river. We know this. The same thing is true for your kid. If they are giving you a hard time, it is not because they're trying to manipulate you. It's not because they're trying to get away with something. It's not because they think that you're a sucker. That's what we were told when we were kids. We now know this is not the truth. We know that this is not the case. You put those kids again in an fMRI machine, they're not giving you a hard time. They're experiencing distress when they do those things. And it's very different. They are not, no kid that actually, we'll say it this way, they lack the developmental mental capacity to be able to manipulate. Being able to manipulate someone, you have to understand social cues. You have to understand how your now actions will predict future actions. Kids do not have the developmental capacity to do those things. Somebody tells me their toddler is manipulating them so that they will do X, Y, and Z. I tell you're giving them too much credit. They literally don't have the brain development to do what you think they're doing.
So do you think that people kind of go, whenever they make those statements, like they've been manipulated in their past, and that's exactly what they're just reliving through that moment?
What's interesting to me is that oftentimes, here's another quote you can pull out.
Let's not tell them too much about the book now. I want them to go buy it.
No, no, this isn't in the book. This isn't in the book. I'm just saying most of the time what I've experienced is that adults will hold kids to adult expectations while they will hold themselves to kids' expectations.
Yeah.
So you get into a spat with your partner and you say something you didn't mean. You're looking for that person to say, I know you didn't mean it. You were just upset. You lashed out. You don't really, whatever.
Yeah.
Exact same thing happens with your kids. They were trying to get one over on me. We will look at kids and we will hold them to expectations that we don't even hold ourselves or adults to.
Yeah.
Which is an ability to control their emotional landscape. So when somebody says like, my kid is doing this, it's not even that that they've experienced that. It's that they have so bought into this idea that kids are in control. Kids have very little control over their emotions. Because this is a lot of this is neuroscience. I'm sorry if I'm boring your listeners,
you're good.
But there's a part of their brain. It's called the OMPFC, the ocular medial prefrontal cortex. It's a little tiny spot. Think of it like the very center of your forehead. That's like where it is. It's just an inch back. That part of their brain is one of the least developed parts. It's one of the latest developing parts. It develops in the 20 age range, 18, 19, 20. That OMPFC is that's the part of your brain that says to the feelings part of your brain, this is not that big of a deal. Kids literally don't have it.
Wow.
So for them, something that feels like a big deal is a big deal.
Yeah.
It just is a big deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like one. It is as big of a deal as anything else is. And where your brain can say, I'm real mad that my team didn't win in the playoffs. I got real upset about that, but come on. There's always next year. I'm a Chicago sports fan. I'm very used to saying there's always next year. Doesn't matter the sport. It's always true.
Always
the
next
Bulls
year.
or the Bears or the Blackhawks. There's been some moments when we've had some success. The 90s were a great time with the Bulls. Other than that, basically we're terrible at sports.
Yep.
I can get frustrated at my teams, and then I can move on and say, this is not that big of a deal.
Exactly.
Your child does not have the part of their brain that allows them to do that.
Wow.
And so that's where I would say, people have been sold this lie, kids manipulate, or adults, even adults that are dysregulated or trying to be manipulative.
Yeah.
There's a reason why when you look at like a sociopath, why they're able to convince people and be so harmful to others. It's because they're not being driven by their emotions. The rest of us are being driven by our emotions. It's pretty hard out there to do life.
Well, that's, and I see exactly what you're talking about. And my daughter is so huge because of all the surgeries and medical trauma that she's been through, days whenever she stays strong up until about 2 or 3 days up until she's got a surgery coming. And 2 to 3 days before, she stops eating, she stops sleeping. She's the PTSD, yeah, exactly, is real in that scenario. And, my wife and I don't try to play it off, but we try to, pull her away from thinking about the surgery. Tell me where you see 3 colors of blue in this room, try to direct her brain in different directions. And, maybe we need to pay more attention to that just because of what you just, you talked about was, it is a big, it's a big deal, but to her, it's a really, really big deal,
Well, and what you're doing is actually one of the evidence-based tips that I talk about in the book. It's called grounding, right? So this is a part of I call it color detective in the book, but basically what you're doing is when she has to identify colors, she has to use a part of her brain that in those moments when she's being driven by her emotions, like literally if you put her under a brain scan, you would see that the part of her brain that thinks is very dark, not a lot of electrical activity. The part of her brain that feels lit up like a Christmas tree. In those moments when you're saying find 3 colors of blue, what you're actually doing is you're kind of forcing the part that's dark to power back up in order to do some work. And so what you're acting as in those moments is you're essentially allowing your OMPFC to act as hers. Yeah. She can't do that. But this is the beautiful thing about parenting. Just because our kid lacks the developmental capacity to do it themselves doesn't mean that they can't do it. It means that we have to walk them up to it. And so what you're doing in those moments is you're actually walking her up to it. Now, we can have a much longer conversation on a follow-up podcast about how we process traumatic things with kids in a way that makes it so that they're not as deeply affected by those things. But in the short term, in those moments, you're doing exactly what you should be doing. Now, just imagine that we can very, very clearly understand if an adult had that experience related to PTSD, like we would give them allowances to not eat, to not sleep. Like we would understand that. Yeah. What's even trickier with kids is when they do that over seemingly foolish things, like what color pants they have on, or the fact that we ran out of time and we didn't get to go to the donut shop. Yeah. And they feel like the world is ending over those things. And we go, that's a silly thing to be upset about. But to them, it's their whole world. Yeah. And so those are the moments where you have this choice and you pick the better choice, which is in the WholeParent method. This is L, lead them out. But you're picking the better choice of how am I going to work with your brain to get that part of your brain, even if just instinctually you're doing this, I'm going to get that part of your brain that can think back online where it can get back in the driver's seat and we can move through this so that we can get you to eat some food so that we can prepare for the surgery. The trickier thing for a lot of parents who are not faced with the same level of just problems that you guys have to cope with is, do parents have the emotional intelligence to do that when their kid is melting down over the color of a cup? Yeah. And if the answer is yes, you will never have to punish your kids again. Because you do that, you come back to it later, you go, so it turned out that cup thing probably wasn't as big of a deal as we thought, huh? Yeah. What should I say to you next time that you get really upset about a cup? I don't know. Okay. Well, how about I just do what I did last time? We do the color game again? Okay. And then the next time, you got to do it again. Third time, they do it themselves. Yeah. And that's the thing. You keep punishing kids. You're just redoing and redoing. You go the way that you're doing with your daughter. If we have the emotional maturity to realize that beyond the really big things, even the small things feel big to them. Every disappointment feels like they got divorced. That's what I try and tell parents. Oh. You go, this isn't that big of a deal. You don't get that toy in the store with them and they're screaming and shouting. Yeah, we could talk about entitlement. Let's have that conversation later. But to them in that moment, feels like they just lost their job. Yeah. Feels like they just got divorced. Feels like, because that part of their brain, the part of your brain that feels fully developed in your toddler, they have the same capacity to feel as sad as you have ever felt in your life. They can feel that sad. Wow. But they have no capacity to control it. And that's the real trick.
Yeah, that's, man, that's eye-opening to think about that, especially whenever your parent or your kids do aggravate you and push you to that limit. Like that's really big to think about.
They're having a hard time. They're not giving you one.
So what's the E in whole? We went through that.
Yeah. So W, remember the wire, or consider the wiring. Yep. H, honor the emotions. O, outline the boundaries and the consequences. In this case, not in this case, but in if you need to. L, lead them out. Use those techniques that you have. I have 1 million in the book. E is empower and equip for the future. This is actually where most parents don't ever do the E. Most parents just go to most parents do all their parenting in O. Yeah. Right? They go, their kid is acting up, they're acting whatever. You walk in, you go, it's not okay to talk to your mom like that. And if you keep talking to your mom like that, I'm going to wash your mouth out with soap, right? Yeah. I'm just giving you kind of a goofy one. But like, that's just O by itself. They don't do any of the lead up. They don't honor the experience. They don't consider what's going on. They don't ask the questions. They just go right to O. Then they don't lead them out. They don't help them to regulate. Yeah. And the worst of all is that they don't come back an hour later, 2 hours later, 15 minutes later, maybe only, right? And they don't do that Monday morning quarterback with their kids. And this is, I think, the most impactful part of the book. I could have written an entire book just on the best way to parent is actually not in those moments of dysregulation. We think about discipline as the things we do when our kids act up. It's not. Discipline is what we do when our kids are calm. Discipline is what we do when our kids are just hanging out and we're having a good day. And we go, you remember yesterday when you said that thing to your mom? I'm just interested in what's going on. And no, parents very rarely do that because they don't want to bring up a wound or whatever. Often they don't want to bring up how they feel about what they did in reaction.
Yeah.
But if they feel confident enough and they actually bring those things up and they bring those things back to the forefront, then you're talking to a kid in that place who is in the best possible learning state. They're calm, they're regulated, they can think about their actions. That emotional part of their brain probably not even online. They're really just thinking. And when you can talk to a kid's thinking brain, what I call their thinking brain, their prefrontal cortex, that's where they're learning. And so Empower for the Future, is all about all of these techniques that I talk about. One of them we've already mentioned is the role playing. Hey, how about you play the role of mom and I'll play the role of you. And when you do that, just for example, not only does your child have the opportunity to experience, which is a lot of parents will do this basically to make their child feel the consequences of what they've just done. Not only do they experience what it's like to be mom and hear those things spoken about them, even more importantly, they tell you exactly what they needed to hear.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I've been doing this. I've been a coach for many years, not like online coach, but like actual sports coach.
Yeah.
And when I coach volleyball, I say, if you were the coach and you were trying to get me to not, turn my hips the wrong way before I swing or something, or to not square up to square up my shoulders before I set the ball, what would you tell me? And say, oh, you just got to, what I've realized is you got to do this and this and this to make it happen. I go, okay, switch back. Hey, you got to do this, this, and this to make it happen. And they're like, oh,
yeah.
You mean I had the answer the whole time? Yeah. And so actually E is about facilitating self-discipline in your kids. E is actually how you, again, quote from the book, how you discipline yourself out of a job. I don't want to have to police my kids. Not fun for me. I want to play with my kids.
Yeah.
I want to have a good time. Sometimes I play a little too rough and I hurt them and I'm going to apologize. But by and large, I want to have a good time.
Yeah.
Like that's what I want to do with my kids. I don't want to be policing your behavior. You know who I want to police their behavior? Them.
Exactly.
That's what equipping and empowering for the future is. It's teaching kids how to police their own behavior.
Wow.
Not because they're afraid of you, but because they actually want to be a decent human being.
Yeah.
And I think most kids do. It's us who train kids out of that. They come out pretty empathetic and loving. I mean, not empathetic so much, but they come out pretty loving and compassionate.
Yeah.
If we can let them be, boy, we can get somewhere.
So I guess to sum this whole thing up is kind of the whole premise of the Dad Show, like open communication.
Yep.
Telling your kids that you love them,
Yep.
telling your kids that you're proud of them, and, tell them that you care about them and keeping that gentleness, that calm. Now you have to be stern at some point in times, but for the most part, as long as you open those lines of communication and you're calm and you express that, especially going to the kids that don't have the families that's been through hard times. And, I don't even want to mention some of the stuff, but,
Yeah.
Especially those kids and even adults at this time, at this point that they've been through it their whole life, like hearing those words, I love you, I care about you, I'm proud of you, and not lashing out and being calm whenever you're speaking with them. I feel like, there's a lot more in the book, but
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of that conversation can be summed up with that little bit of synopsis there.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of us were taught, just to kind of summarize exactly what you just said, the I love you piece, right? A lot of us were taught that the basis for discipline is control, right? That really there has to be a hierarchy. I'm not saying there isn't a hierarchy. We are still, we have to lead.
Yes.
We're the adults. We are the ones with a much more robust sense of the world, a developed brain, all of that stuff, right? There's a hierarchy, but a lot of people are like, hey, discipline is about control and compliance. We actually know that all discipline comes from a place of connection, not control.
Yeah.
And so if you can connect with your kid first, that's really all this comes down to. Number one, you're not going to want to punish him. Ryan, do you ever want to punish your kid?
No, I don't.
We do it sometimes when we're out of control, and other times when we feel like we have to.
Yeah.
But if we deeply connect with our kid first, I actually don't have to convince most parents. Once they get to W and H, I never have to convince them not to punish again, because when you're reasonable and when you're calm and when you lead with love, you don't punish.
Yeah.
And that's the
beautiful
beautiful
so
thing.
much better too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is to take us down a long path, but I mean, if we're so sure punishment works, why don't we do it to our partners?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, because we know that it's much better received when we come to them with compassion and vulnerability and connection first, and we lead with love and we express our desires in a calm fashion. Oh yeah, it's almost as if we did that with our kids, they'd probably be a lot better off too.
Well, that's a perfectly good segue into my next question for you. Is you have all this going on, you've got 4 kids, but at the end of the day, you're still a husband. And you still have a loving wife, and you have to show all that to your wife. So how do you juggle all of this stuff while still making your wife feel loved, feel important, and spending that quality time with her?
Yeah, super simple. I have stopped trying to be for my wife what I thought a good husband was supposed to be. And I have started to actually listen actively to what she's looking for.
That's huge.
One thing that's kind of silly, we don't really parent with each other. In other words, we try and it's easier for one of us to take the baby and the other one to take the other 3 than it is to try and have everybody in the room at the same time. Nobody likes being judged in their parenting. I don't like when my wife judges my parenting. She doesn't like when I judge hers. Vacations are a little tricky, but we do try and parent separately. And people say, but don't you want to spend time with your wife? Well, that's why on the back end of the day, at 7 p.m. tonight, or I guess 8 p.m. after bedtime, my phone goes away, and from 8 p.m. until when we go to bed, that's her time. I don't take meetings. I really don't travel unless I absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And from 8 to 10:30, we just talk. And some people, sometimes we got to watch a show or something. There's the kids, sleep in, and we got to be quiet. But yeah, majority of the 10 years that I've been married to my wife, from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., that's just us talking. And I think if you talk and if you listen, basically every relationship works.
And that's so huge to say that you put your phone away. You disconnect.
That's new. That's new, Ryan.
Okay.
That's new as of like a month ago where I just realized that anytime I got a notification, it took me out of that moment. And I just decided with some strong, encouraging words from her that it was not worth being taken out of those moments.
And it's, sometimes it don't even get to that moment. You yourself or your spouse or both of you is so caught up in whatever you're looking at on your phone that you never make that connection to even be broken in the first place. And so
that's right.
Like one of the big things that we do at our house is when we sit down as a family and we eat dinner at a table and we have communication, we don't turn on the TV, all phones are away. It doesn't matter if they ring, whatever.
Leave them.
It's put away, and that is our time as a family. I'm a fireman, so I work a 24-hour shift, so I'm not home all the time. And so I really, really value that time to be able to sit down at a table and eat with my kids and my wife and, us being a family. And I don't want those distractions. And I'm very guilty. I'm not going to say that I'm the best at it. That, I don't allow the distractions to happen, but that's really huge. And so that's two things that I advise is, for one, to sit down as a family and eat dinner and put everything away. And then just like you said, whenever you and your wife have that time after the kids are in bed, like put the phone away and just spend time as husband and wife and connect and communicate. That's huge.
I love that. Yeah, the dinner thing for us is one of those. It's not quite time for that yet in my house. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and so a lot of times if I try and put too much expectation on we're all going to sit here for dinner, we wind up ruining it for the 8-year-old and my wife and me. Sometimes it's more like you eat a piece of pasta and you'll run away. But you know what? Someday I am going to be right where you are, Ryan, because I do think that's huge. Yeah. It's huge.
And it is. And man, everybody says it. Don't wish your life away to where you're like, man, I can't wait till they get to this age. Yeah. Like, enjoy it all, because, man, I miss, even though when my babies were babies, we were in the hospital, for years and spending that time. And that's where I got to see them as babies, not out in the actual household. But I miss that time of.
But when you're holding them and there's that, 12 inches between nose and nose.
Yes.
You could be on Mount Everest. You could be in Antarctica. You could be in the Amazon. It wouldn't matter. The whole world is that 12 inches. So yeah. I'm right with you.
I agree 100%. Before I let you get off here today,
yes,
there's I seen one of your videos and man, I loved it, because I really try to push my kids, even in their condition and everything that they have that's going on. You basically said, don't help your kids too much, because you're enabling them on dependency.
That's right.
And, like my daughter going through her therapies and my son and their surgeries and all the above, like I'm like, I try to push them and push them and push them, almost to the point of where I'm sounding harsh.
Right.
But, I'm trying to teach them to be able to do it themselves and depend on themselves, not depend on me to always, or her mom to be there to take care of them. So
it's a delicate balance. So what Harvard tells us is that there's 3 types of stress. There's what we consider just kind of tolerable stress. This is the stress that most of us face every day. It's not stress that really helps us grow, but it's tolerable. It just kind of leaves us. Then there's good stress. We very rarely talk about good stress, but good stress is, doing those things that stretches us. And as a result, we wind up having more agency, more confidence. And then there's toxic stress. And toxic stress is tolerable stress if you don't have a safe home to go to. And so any stress, losing a loved one, can be tolerable if you have people and safe people like parents, if you're a child, to process those things with, or it can become toxic if you don't have that. And so here's where I go with the pushing kids, why I say the stress piece is how I think about this. I am always going to try and push my kids towards good stress that's going to help them grow.
Yeah.
That said, a lot of times what's good stress versus toxic stress, or good stress versus bad stress, which could either be toxic or tolerable, is in the child's perception, in my kid's perception of what's happening. And so in our family, I'm the pusher and my wife is the safe home base. And I'm also the safe home base when it needs to be.
Yeah.
But what I try and encourage parents to do is, if your inclination is to push, learn to be safe. Learn to say, it's okay if this isn't today. If your inclination is to say, it's okay if this isn't today, first, learn to push. Give you a great example. My son is highly sensitive. It's this thing, I could get into it for the next hour if you want it, but my son's highly sensitive. It means that one of the ways that he goes through the world is that he really has to see other people do it before he does. He never wants to be the first.
Yeah.
Not going to be the first kid in the pool. My youngest, or I guess second youngest, my 3-year-old, jump in the pool, no floaties, like hopefully I'll swim. Like nobody's in there. We got to keep stuff away from this kid. The other day he just took the waffle iron out, plugged it in. Just wild, right? He does whatever. That's just who he is. Nobody's gonna have to tell this kid to do anything. He's gonna do it himself. But my son, we have this local little pool, but it's got some slides, so it's a community thing. And he's looking at these slides last year in the beginning of the summer, and he's going, I'm never going down those in my life. And I'm thinking to myself, he can swim, he'd probably enjoy it. And my instinct as the pusher is to go, come on, let's just get up there. Let's just see what it's like up there. Come on. Okay, you could go and just give him a little put, and then you're going to enjoy it. I'm that dad. But instead I went, okay, my instinct is to push. Let me just back up a little bit. So I backed up a little bit. 2 weeks later, we're there again. His friend is there, our next door neighbor. and Muhammad wants to go down this slide. And I said, why don't you just go up there with him so you can watch him go down? I mean, you don't have to go down, but just go watch him.
Yeah.
My son sees him go down. This kid who told me 2 weeks ago, I'm never doing this my whole life. Dad, can I go on the blue slide? Of course you can go on the blue slide. Now, if it had been my wife, she'd have said, are you sure you want to go on the blue slide? So this is the moment, right? We have to learn when we push and when we're safe. And if we can do that effectively, our kids will achieve to their highest standard, because you push a kid beyond what they're able or willing to do, and they'll respond by saying, I'm never going to that park with you again.
Yeah.
And then you miss the opportunity.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you say, are you sure you want to go on the blue slide? It's really scary. Okay, I'm rethinking this. I'm not doing it anymore. And so it's a delicate balance. But I do think we are in a period of time in parenting where I watch most parents rush in to help, and it's hurting our kids. So that's the real thing, right? Let your kids fall off. I talk about this extensively in the book. Let your kids fall off playground equipment. It's okay.
Yeah.
Let your kids have that uncomfortable conversation with their friends. Don't save them. Let your kids do that thing that they're not maybe going to really like the outcome. All those things are good stress. But you also don't, just as we do it, we also don't have to always push. We can also be the person who goes, okay, your mom's out here. I'm going to take on that role. And man, did it pay off, because this kid is flying on these slides now, Ryan.
Wow.
Like, just every time, can we go? I got to get on those slides. Now I'm like, hey, buddy, no head first.
Yeah. Now you want to be the scared one. You want to reserve back.
That's right. Now I'm like, shoot, as I watch this kid come, his friend is wearing this, like, they're Muslim, and so he's wearing this like rash guard, because he's really modesty, right? My son's like this like little, tiny, he likes to wear this like, 3T swimsuit, even though he's like 8 years old. He just likes how it feels. And he's like, flying down this thing, because he's like a wet seal.
Oh yeah.
And so his friend is just like scooting down nice and slow, and I'm like, yeah, man, if you had known. I also didn't say that, well, Muhammad's wearing a rash guard, so he went slower.
Yeah.
You can let him have those experiences, but boy, man, he shoots out of that thing, like skips on the water when he comes out the bottom.
Here in about a year, you'll be going putting baby oil on the slides.
Oh my gosh. That's how he is when we go sledding, man. He goes sledding. He's just running up, on his chest. This is a kid who you'd never expect that from.
Wow.
But he's learned to be safe. And that's the thing. That's actually, paradoxically, having good boundaries, that actually is what makes kids feel safe to do that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. Well, man, before I close this out today, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you think would be, you're good, don't worry about it. Anything that you would think that would be?
No, you know what? I really hope that the dads who listen give this a shot. I understand hearing somebody talk about a totally different way of parenting than how most of us were raised can feel disorienting. It can feel scary. I don't mean to say that you're scared, but it can feel disorienting.
Yeah.
And so just, give it a shot. And if you try some of this stuff with your kid, you try some of that playing different roles or, processing or grounding or whatever, and it seems like it's working better than what you were doing before, go ahead and grab my book, grab the audio version of my book. I read it myself from my publisher, and check it out. You can, I think what I've heard is that if you listen to one podcast, it's likely that you listen to up to 5 podcasts. And so keep listening to The Dad Show. But if you want to come over and talk about neuroscience parenting, pretty short episodes, the WholeParent podcast is another place to find me.
Hey, go follow Jon at the WholeParent podcast. The Dad Show's good, but Jon's got a lot better tips and tricks. So please go follow Jon. Go buy his book. At the time this is dropping, his book is available. And go get it. You can get that at Amazon, Walmart, every book outlet. Is that correct?
As far as I know, you can get it basically anywhere, but if you order it online, you can get it, I know for sure you can get it. And so I'll give you the link for the show notes.
Awesome, man. And I'm going to get it. I haven't read it, hadn't had an opportunity yet, but I'm excited about it. And I'm excited to put some of these tips and tricks into place in my life as a dad, as a father, and even as a husband going through this. So go follow Jon at a WholeParent. Is that correct?
That's right.
That's on all social media as well. So, John, man, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to give us the insight and for being with us today, man.
The pleasure has been all mine, Ryan. Thank you.
Awesome, John. You have a great day. And all of you all, as always, we love you, we care about you, and we're proud of you. God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast. Please like, review, and subscribe.